Good morning. With the help of Hashem, we are learning Yerushalmi Shavi'is, Perek Aleph, Halacha Aleph, and God willing, starting Halacha Beis. We are learning today Daf Beis. I know Daf Beis sounds like the first Daf, but no, here in the Yerushalmi, we start with Daf Aleph. We left off on Daf Aleph, Amid Beis, 6 lines before the bottom of the Amid, whether the Girsa is Rav Acha b'Shem Rabbi Yonasan or Rav Ami b'Shem Rabbi Yonasan, and quickly recapping where we are at. So we learned in our opening Mishnah a detailed halacha of what we call Tosefes Shvi'is. Tosefes Shvi'is means that the prohibitions connected to working the land, aside of them being during the 7th year, they begin prior to the 7th year. And everything we learned yesterday was built on the following premise, that Mida Oiraisa, whether it's alluded to in a pasuk, whether it's a halacha l'Moshe Sinai, there is a 30-day prior to Shvi'is extension. In other words, the last 30 days of the 6th year, and we're focusing on plowing. One may not plow any type of field. Came along the Chachamim, that's the understanding we learned yesterday, Bizman, Beis Shammai, and Beis Hillel, and they made an enactment that since we see that Hashem added Tosefes Shvi'is, we're going to add to that. And they added what we call Isur Shnei Perakim. They added by a stay Lavan that from Pesach and on in the 6th year, you may not plow. And a stay Elon, which was the topic of our Mishnah, you may not plow Beis Shammai, Beis Hillel. Let's just focus on Beis Hillel from Shavuos, from Atzeres. However, the Gemara on Daf Aleph Amid Beis on the tops points out a fact that in the time of the end of the era of the Mishnah and in the beginning of the Zman of the Gemara, people would plow during the entire 6th year, completely, all the way up until Rosh Hashanah. So came along the Gemara and said that Rabbi Gamliel and his Beis Din, they abolished, they nullified, they undid the Isur Shnei Perakim. Now, really, we asked the question, how can they Bechlal take away the Isur Shnei Perakim legamre until Rosh Hashanah, when the 30 days prior is a doiraisa, and everyone points to this Yerushalmi to point out that the approach that we said, either Rambam, that whenever Yovel is not noyik, and therefore Shemitah is only midrabanan, so avad, if the whole Shemitah is midrabanan, even the 30-day prior is midrabanan, or that the Isur doiraisa is only during the times of the Beis HaMikdash, and Churban, from the times of Churban Beis HaMikdash, and don't forget Rabbi Gamliel and his Beis Din that abolished this decree, they lived after the Churban Bayesheni, so therefore there wasn't an Tosefes Midoiraisa. Bottom line is, everything is Midrabanan, and they abolished it. The problem is that Ein Beis Din Yachal Levatel Divrei Chaverei Elim Kain Gadol Mimenu B'Chachma U'B'Minyan, and the Beis Din, the Sanhedrin of Rabbi Gamliel, are not Gadol B'Chachma U'B'Minyan from the Batei Dinim or from the Beis Din, from the Sanhedrin, from the times of Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. That was the question we had yesterday, and we learned yesterday, approach number 1, that when Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, from the beginning, from when they made the enactment, what we call the Isur Shnei Perakim, they did it conditionally. And in the Lashon HaGemara, they said from the beginning that we're making a takana, but if she'im bikshu lachsoid, if the Jewish community later says it's too much, they want to undo it, they said lechatchila yachzoidu, it could be undone. So whenever an enactment was made from the outset, on the condition that people should continuously opt in, and if they want, they can opt out, then we could opt out. Not opting out without a Sanhedrin, you need to have a Sanhedrin, but Rabbi Gamliel, Taka was not Gadol Mimenu B'Chachma B'Minyan, they were able to do it. That was what we learned yesterday. Now today, we're having a Gevaldik Chiddush. The Gemara today is going to introduce, again, either Rav Acha, that's what we have written over here, or Rav Ami, that's the Girsa that we have in the Yalkut Shemaini, that he quotes here in the Shinur Nuscha'os. They say like this, that whenever a Beis Din makes a takana based on the understanding of psukim, which is, as we were explaining, we were quoting a pasuk in Parshas Ki Sisa, that the pasuk for sure begins with a mitzvah of keeping Shabbos, but from there it goes bechodesh ubekatziv, that the pasuk then speaks about resting plowing and harvesting, and we're going to follow Dafka Shitas Rabbi Akiva yesterday, that indeed Bechodesh Ubekotzer is referring to Tosefah Shvis. If a later Beis Din, which is what the Gemara is going to argue today, interprets that whole pasuk differently, and therefore they are challenging a previous Beis Din, you made a takana based on our understanding that midoiraisa there's Tosefah Shvis, and then you went ahead and you added to it. A later Beis Din can tell the earlier Beis Din, we disagree with your interpretation of those psukim. We understand, as we'll see right now, like Rabbi Shmuel holds, that pasuk is b'chlal not talking about Tosefah Shvis. Midoiraisa, there isn't Tosefah Shvis. If there isn't a Midoiraisa Tosefah Shvis, so then what you did is automatically collapsed. We collapsed the whole takana. The whole takana was based on extending a doiraisa. We disagree with such a doiraisa. And a later Beis Din is able to challenge a explanation and interpretation of psukim. That they are allowed to do. They're not being mavatal. They're saying you touched the pasuk wrong. Your whole takana was based on a misinterpretation. That they're able to do. This is quite amazing. We'll have a moment. We're going to learn Tosfos and Moed Katan, that will have a little nuance of a challenge on our approach, but that more or less will be the first topic of today. The Gemara is going to further elaborate Shitas Beis Hillel, that when there was this takana, that b'stei ha'ilon, it begins from atzeres. We're going to have more words to it. We already spoke it out yesterday. It has to do with the moisture in the ground. When it's moist and you plow, you benefit. When there's no more moisture, you make the ground better for the next year. But whatever is there is not good. We're going to speak a little bit about plowing in a field that has barren trees, if there is an issue, if there's no issue. And we're going to move on to halacha beis. And let me give you a gavaldik introduction to halacha beis. Again, we spoke about stei ilon. Stei ilon means that whenever this land is defined as an orchard, and we're going to need, if Kevin is not on, Danny, I'm the Gabay, I'll need some pictures just to illustrate, it will help. I'm allowed to plow the entire orchard from up until Shavuos. The Rabbanon, before Rabbi Gamliel, the Isur is only from Shavuos. If you have a stei lovin, the Mishnah didn't speak about it, but if you have a field that's a non-orchard, let's call it a grain field, then the prohibition of plowing begins midrabanan from Pesach. So now the question is, what happens if you have a field and there are trees planted in the field, but they are so dispersed, there'll be a point that they're so far away from each other, you can't classify that field as a orchard, as a stei ilon. You won't. What you will say is that immediately around that tree, you can plow until Shavuos. But that heter doesn't extend to the whole sada. The whole sada will be considered as stei lavan. So we're going to see how close do they have to be for you to say the whole area is called the stei ilon. And the Gemara is going to equate this topic to a topic that we have both in the Mishnah and in the Gemara in Bava Basra, similar but not the same, regarding sale. When a person sells trees, first of all, when it comes especially to real estate, we never say, look at the money that was paid to determine what was sold. We don't look at it that way. Real estate has infinite value. So the question is, if I, the seller, explicitly told the buyer, I'm selling you 3 trees. The buyer paid for 3 trees. There is a point where if they are configured also in a certain close proximity, we understand that what was sold wasn't only the tree, it was also the land with the tree. Now, by the way, the topic of Bava Basra is not about the whole field. The land will be the land under the tree. The land will be the land immediately around the tree. Here we're speaking about the whole field, but the concept of that if trees are configured, they're planted in a certain close proximity, then we view those trees as trees and land, as an orchard. And if they are too far apart, or maybe even too close together, then we look at the trees as only trees. So that will be the comparison with differences, with no differences. We're going to unpackage a whole sugya with that. And that's an intro for Daf Beis. And without any further ado, Chavre, we are going into Daf Aleph Amid Beis, 6 lines before the bottom of the Amid. Again, we're going to read Rav Acha just to point out that some people are goydes Rav Ami. So again, we're beginning with a whole new answer as we spoke out properly in our introduction. And he says, Gavaldik, Rav Acha b'shem Rabbi Yoinasan, he answers that b'sha'ah sha'asru. The whole Rabbanon, the whole Beis Shammai Beis Hillel enactment, yes, they extended what they understood to be an Isur Doiraisa called Toisef Shvi'is. In other words, they began lemikra samchu. They began based on their then understanding of the psukim, and it's really the way Rabbi Akiva teaches b'chodesh ubekotzer tishbois, as we'll see in a moment. And when Rabban Gamliel abolished that decree, he didn't abolish the decree. He said, I challenge the premise that there is no doiraisa to Sefer Shvis. Ubeshashi tiru lemikra samchu, as the Gemara is going to show you the psukim that Rabbi Gamliel uses to say, no. The pasuk in Kisisa means the way Rabbi Shmuel says it, not the way Rabbi Akiva says it, which means it's not about Shemitah. There is no concept of Tosef Shvi'is. And automatically the whole takana falls away. And let's go. Shasha asru lemikra samchu. So what pasuk are we referring to? Yes, the pasuk in Kisisa. Yes, the pasuk begins with Shabbos, right? Sheishis yomim ta'avoid. That's the pasuk in Kisisa. Ubayoim hashvi'i tishbois. That's how the pasuk begins. But in the same verse, it continues bechadish ubekatzer tishbois. And as we pointed out, that we can't say that the Chodesh ubekatzer tishbois is referring to Shabbos. Why not? Let's read it inside. Because, well, but not the Gemara is mekatzer. Why not? Because on Shabbos, only bechodesh ubekatzer tishbois. What are you talking about? There are lametes malachas. Oh, so therefore we say the Chodesh sheketzira yasser. We're speaking about a Chadisha sheketzira yasser, which means not only another nuance in the way the Gemara words it over here. We're speaking about Shemitah. In other words, like we said yesterday, even though Hashem says 6 days you can tavoid, 6 days you can tavoid, God says, hold on, don't think you can always work for 6 days. Because when it comes to the 7th year, you can't work even on the 6 days when it comes to farming or to agricultural works. But even more than that, it's not that Ubechodesh, Ubekatzer Tishbois is referring to the Shemitah year. Let's go with Rabbi Akiva. We didn't speak about this detail yesterday. Bechodesh ubekatzer tishbois is already speaking about Tosef Shvi'is. How do you see Bechodesh ubekatzer tishbois? So what we said yesterday is that even though Katzir, the Isur of Ketzira, in Sfiach Ketzir Choloi Siksur is written in Bahar, but Charisha Bechlal is not mentioned. Now this Beraisa, this Limud, this Torah Shabal Pam, is different. It's more than that. That there is a Chodesh Ketzira Yasur. What type of Chodesh is Ketzira Yasur? Ze Chodesh Shel Eresh Shvi'is Shu Nichnas L'Shvi'is. It means you can't plow if the purpose of your plowing is to benefit the next harvest. Which means plowing that's done in any year, at the end of one year, is no longer for that year because the fruit, the produce of that year was already harvested. Why are you plowing at the end of any year for that which you're going to harvest the next year? And this is referring to Tosef Shvi'is. Again, and Rabbi Akiva, or many more than Rabbi Akiva, this is going back to Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, again, they understood this to mean 30 days. The pasuk is a doiraisa, and then they extend it. And then when it says, what's the katzir? Again, that we already learned yesterday. Not that the katzir is referring to the katzir of the 7th year. The Torah says as sfiach ketzir chaloi siksar. The katzir means that even though you're harvesting something on the 8th year, like we said yesterday, if it grew a third or more on the 7th year, it's bound by restrictions of Shemitah year. Uber katzir shecharisha yasser. That means you harvested something from the year. It grew on a year that you can't plow. The Eza says that Katzir Shol Shvi'is, Shuyotzin L'Mitzvah Shvi'is. So, Bekitzer, since they interpret it like Rabbi Akiva does, the pasuk in Kisisa, not only in reference to Shemitah, but in reference to Tosefes, both in the beginning and at the end. We're going to focus here on the beginning. So based on that, Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel says, you know what? If Hashem is telling you that you already cannot plow 30 days prior, well, let's add to that. And then they added 2 details. Stay Ilon Shvois, Isu Shnei Parakim. Stay Lavan from Pesach. However, Daf Abeis came along Rabbi Gamliel, Shoshi Tiru. Rabbi Gamliel says, what you said cannot be. Lemikra Samchu. Now, there's a question whether the pasuk that we are beginning with is an Yisrael. the way we have a girsa. It's a little bit problematic. We had the same problem yesterday, but let's read what we have. It says in the Seres Adibrois, Sheishes Shamam Tabed Vasisam Alachtecha. Now, we're making, based on this pasuk, somehow a hekish between Shabbos and Shemitah. Or, before we continue in the Gemara, look inside the Mara folder. Sheishes Yamim Tavoid. So he doesn't do that. So the Mara folder actually quotes the same pasuk in Kisisa. I just have a problem with the girsa that we have in the Mara folder, because if you look inside, it says Hachi Garsinon. I understand the Mara folder had a girsa that does not begin with the Aseres Adibris. It's not needed. It's not needed. Use the pasuk in Kisisa. Again, the pasuk in the same verse we put together. I can tell you the words we have in our Torah. Sheishes Yamim Tavoid ubayoyim ashvi tishbois. Look inside the words inside the Mara folder. Sheishes Yamim Tasa Masecha ubayoyim ashvi tishbois. I know that what's written in the Mara folder is wrong. In other words, I think the Bacher, the Zetzer, made a mistake. He mixed the Girsa in the Gemara with the Girsa of the Mara folder. The Mara folder saying is that Ubisha Tiru came from this verse in Kisisa. Now it works. That what? The Hikish Akos of Tishbois, the Yom Hashvi, the Tishbois, the Becharish of Ekotzer, Shemaida Bishvi is. In other words, even if you're going to tell me Becharish of Ekotzer Tishbois means Shemitah, you, Rabbi Akiva, even if you're going to say that, but you have in the same pasuk Shabbos and Shemitah. That's one way of learning the Gemara. Or Lishna Achrin, I'm reading in the Mara Fulda. Indeed, let's go with the Girsa that we have. That the Beis Din of Rabbi Gamliel, they began with the pasuk of the Aseres Adibros. And now we're using a Hekesh and Svara. We see in the Torah, 6 days you work, 1 day you rest. We see in Parshas Bahar, 6 years you work, 1 year you rest. So we make a hekesh between the concept of Shabbos to the concept of Shemitah. And what do we use with that hekesh? So either it's from the pasuk and Kisisa, or it's from the concept. You see, there's a cycle of 7 that's divided into 6 and 1. 6 you work, 1 you rest. Ma erev Shabbos bereishis, just like on Shabbos. That's what it means, erev Shabbos bereishis. Or erev Shabbos means Friday. At muter lasis malacha at shetishkachama, you are allowed to work until shkia. There is no biblical Tosefes Shabbos. Af erev Shabbos shanim at muter lasis malacha at shetishkachama. If you make a hekesh between Shemitah and Shabbos, so let's learn from Shabbos. By Shabbos, there's no Tosefes Shabbos. Now everyone should jump out of their seats because we know that there's Tosefes Shabbos midoiraisa. So we're going to get to that in a moment. Before that, but since you can work until Shkia, so don't come and tell me that Kisisa can be there's Tosefes. So what does it mean? So first of all, you look inside Chitas, Chumash Rashi. Rashi in Kisisa quotes Rabbi Yishmael, even though the Rashi doesn't quote his name, and his words are it's all about Shabbos. And the Torah adds by Shabbos Chodesh ubekotzer to juxtapose Chodesh and Kotzer on Shabbos. There is never a mitzvah connected to plowing. Chodesh is always Rishus. So therefore, what type of ketzira must you refrain from on Shabbos? A ketzira that's optional. And that's to tell you that there is one act of ketzira that's a mitzvah, and that's ketzira of the omer. And we would harvest the omer the night before we brought the carbon omer, which is on the 16th day of Nisan. So if we would harvest chevre on Friday night, we would harvest barley to be brought on Shabbos, even though it's on Shabbos, because the Torah only prohibits ktsira shel rishus. It's not again. That's the way he teaches that puzzle. Now the problem is, so now it's beautiful. No, Rabbi Gamliel says there's no Tosefes, no such a thing as 30 days you can't work. So if there's no such a thing as 30 days, the whole thing becomes he collapsed the basis of the takana. Comes along Tosfos. That's where there are many Rishonim that speak about it. But here in Moed and Daf Dalid in Bavli, Daf Dalid Amud Dalid. So we're learning the second Tosfos. The Ikashya v'hamafkinen mikra b'mesechtes Yuma Pedig Basra Daf Peyalef Amud Beis the Tzarich Lasos Tosefes Gabe Shabbos Bein B'Knisasa Bein B'Yitziyasa. It's called Lo Hisifa Michoil Ala Kodesh. And no one, by the way, no one argues with that. So what are we talking about? So he gives an interesting answer. Ikala Meimar, that Hahu Purta, which is true. Tosefes, the Tosefes Shabbos is very little. It's like minutes. loika chashiv. Kivim do have a ela kol shehu. And by the way, he says, "V'chi hahu sheyura nami yehi moide Rabbi Gamliel the tzarich lo haisef." Now, how would you apply a few moments b'negeya not doing agricultural work before Tosfos doesn't say? But to say 30 days, that's a lot that we don't have. And indeed, we, all of us, do Tosefes Shabbos minutes. Notice when we say that it's 18 minutes before Shkia, as Lich mentioned, be'emes, it's probably 20 minutes. The Lich mentioned that you have is 20 minutes or 21 minutes. And don't tell it to people because people then are going to add a few minutes. They're not allowed to do that because you have to be moisif, michal ala kodesh. And the same thing be yitziyasa. We all know that. Look at a regular weekday night when you when you daven ma'ariv, and look at Shabbos. We don't go the 72 minutes, but we add minutes. We add a few minutes. There's other approaches. We'll leave it at that. Okay. What's amazing is that the Chachamim, we're speaking about Chazal, they had the power, I don't care if it's 200 years later, 500 years later, to challenge a drasha of the pasuk. And that will affect halacha. And not only that, that would automatically abolish certain takanas Chachamim that they had. Ein based in Yachal Levatel, Divrei based in Chaveri, Elam Kain Gadol Amenu Chacham Aminyan, is that if the premise of the Doiraisa is the same, they made a siyag, they're challenging only the siyag. Okay, so Beis Hillel said that that when they added, let's go to how it used to be. We understood there was a 30-day prohibition biblically, came along Beis Hillel and they said, you know what, we're going to add by a stay Elon back until Shavuos. What's the yichus of Shavuos? V'lama ad atzeres. So he says, Pashan, Atkan, the logic behind Beis Hillel is like Beis Shammai. Atkan hu yafal pri. Plowing up until Shavuos is good for the produce of that year. That means of the 6th year. If you plow then, menabel peidoisov, it's going to damage it. It's going to ruin it. Now, people would do it for the land. And when I mentioned yesterday about moisture, it's from this Gemara in a few lines. It has to do with the moisture. When the land is moist, when you plow, you allow that moisture to penetrate deeper, and that is beneficial for the current produce. When the land is already dried out, then not only, there's no purpose. Not only that, but then there's always a problem that you might be actually hurting the roots of the tree. People do it for the land for next year, but it's zikr not beneficial. There's more downside than upside. I frag the Gemara of Hataninon, and we're quoting not halacha beis, but halacha gimel, that echad ilan sarak ve'echad ilan meichel. If it's about the pedi, if it's about the fruit, so why do we learn that the same rule of adcho atzeres prior to atzeres, yeah, but from atzeres at Yantiv you can't do it anyways, but after Shavuos you can't. Why would that apply to an ilan sarak when there are no pedas to begin with? In other words, why wouldn't we say that by a ilan sarak you can plow either all the way to Rosh Hashanah, or you can plow up until the doiraisa of 30 days? Why wouldn't you say that? So the Gemara answers, no, that by a ilan sarak, yeah, there are no pedas, but the tree itself is the pedi. People use these types of barren trees for lumber. And if you do an act of plowing that would make the tree itself become thicker, that's the pedi. Until Shavuos, if you plow, even by an ilan sarak, same idea. There's moisture, so you're going to add moisture into the roots of the tree. So the wood of the trunk or the tree will become somehow thicker someplace. So if you're planning to cut the trees down, let's say for construction, you're having a better tree. You're benefiting the tree.
Rabbi, is there a problem like harvesting wood on Shemitah?
No. But so the problem is that's a Gemara's kasha. Okay, I get it. If we're gonna, let's say after Shvius, it won't benefit the tree. So it doesn't benefit the tree. It's going that direction. I would say, Danny, what we're learning here is that, that if my intent is to harvest lumber, so then we view lumber as pri haaretz. That's what the Gemara is saying. If your intent is to harvest is to cut down trees and to use the trees, then the tree is called Perei Haaretz, and you cannot work the land for the trees. But if there's no fruits, and if you're plowing right now, if anything, you're making the tree worse. So what's the problem? So that's the Gemara's kasha. So v'yacharosh. So the Gemara says, why would someone plow? The only reason someone would plow is because they have in mind that maybe they want to plant the land next year. So you want to plow it right now. So very good, Danny. What we began today to learn is that the prohibition, certainly midairaisa, of doing agricultural work on the land is only if it benefits foodstuff, or only if it benefits a product. Stam to be chodesh the grand theoretically would not be a problem at all. It's not connected to there's no product here. And the Gemara says, well, why would
an output?
What was that?
Like output?
Output. Very good. Very good. Plowing is prohibited because plowing is the step prior to planting. And if someone plows and they know that whatever here right now on the field doesn't benefit, why would they plow? Only because they want to leave the possibility of planting open. That's what's problematic. Then the Mishnah said regarding Bisham Bisilol, Krevim Divrei Elo, Liaske Divrei Elo. Now, which way? Who is more machmer? So the Gemara's presumption is that the Beishamai can be more lenient. Beishamai, by the way, could be more lenient, right? Because if the land is moist during Shavuos, and therefore you can still plow up until a week or two after Shavuos leBeishamai, so then Beis Hillel is more machmer. The problem is that we put together the few instances where Beis Hillel was more machmer than Beishamai in a series of Mishnayos and Mesechtes Eiduyos. So frag the Gemara v'lama loy tinisiya mikol Beishamai mechum Beis Hillel Mesechtes Eidis Iduyos Eiduyos. And the Gemara answers because it's not always that way. I know that sometimes Beishamai, who doesn't give a fixed date, he just uses the logic. Sometimes it's going to chap, Beishamai will be more lenient. But on the other hand, sometimes if it was a dry winter, so the land got dried out even earlier, Beishamai is going to be more machmir. That's the Gemara's answer. Pa'amim, and here it's about leichus. That's where we get these words. Pa'amim she'en agasham mitzuyim, and therefore ve'en aleichem mitzuyim. And therefore, it will be aser leBeishamai even before Shavuos. Who asid lachresh koidem lo atzeres kedeVeishamai. Asid lachresh means that even if someone wants to plow before Shavuos, leBeishamai it will be prohibited. And Beis Hillel in that circumstance will be more lenient because they give a fixed date ado atzeres. When do we quote in Eiduyos Kulei Beishamai Chumra Beis Hillel when it's always a kula Beishamai and a chumra Beis Hillel? Scenarios where sometimes like this or sometimes like that is not quoted there at all. And siyum on the first halacha. Now we're beginning halacha base. Okay, the picture now is not so important, but the picture later will be more important. So again, just to repeat one basic rule: if it's not an orchard, then during that period of time when we had the Isur of Shnei Perakim, a non-orchard land was already not allowed, midrabanan, to be plowed from Pesach. When we have an orchard, you can plow until Shavuos. How do you define an orchard? Meaning, I want to make it clear, that wherever you have a tree that you will be allowed to plant in the close proximity around the tree, and those of us who learn Kalayim, we're going to have some crossovers today and tomorrow to Kalayim with the numbers. We'll see 2 amas around the tree. That's for sure. No, it's the immediate area around the tree, even if it's not an orchard, will be an area in where we can plow up until Shavuos. But when the Mishnah said a sdei ilan means that there is a chunk of land, that the whole chunk of land will be called an orchard, and even not in the immediate circumference around the tree, you'll have the heter. No, we'll say the whole piece of land is called an orchard, and you can plow there until Atzeres. So what makes an orchard an orchard? And it has to do with how many trees spread out in the size of the land. Says the Mishnah, that's the meaning. Ezehu stei ha'ilan. How do you define an orchard? and not an individual tree. So we are beginning with a besa. We guys, it's good to chazer. We learned this in Kalayim. A besa either is 50 by 50 amas. Let's speak about square amas. 50 by 50 amas means a land that has in it 2,500 square amas. So if you have in a besa three trees, that entire besa is called a stei ilan. Okay. Now, do those three trees have to be spread out with a uniformity? Do they have to be spread out in an equal distance? There's a big machloikis about it, and we're going to go with the Rash Elio. Remember what I'm saying now, because we're going to compare this to a sugya in Bava Basra, and it won't be exactly the same. But over here, no. But there is one detail, and that we have to remember. L'kula alma. Who remembers from Kalayim, how much space do you need for you to be able to plow using an oxen and a plow? You have to have 4 amas. If you remember, the avoida around a kedem, all right, of 4 amas is because that was then the space that you needed to properly plow. If the three trees were planted so close to each other that you don't have 4 amas between the trees, then for sure, even if whoever's looking at the picture, even if you don't subscribe to those Rishonim who hold that the 3 trees have to be equally spread out in this stei ilan, that's one approach. But even if you don't need that, in our Mishnah, in Masechta Shvi'is, in this Eser Shnei Perakim, you do need for them to be planted out in a way where a plow won't get stuck in between the trees. Then you have yourself a bona fide stei ilan, which means the entire Beisah is called a stei ilan, and you can plow up until Atzeres. That's the Mishnah. Now, another detail. Turning to the Af, Beis Amid Beis, so now we spoke about the quantity of trees, and now we're
Rabbi, I'm sorry. If it's not categorized as a stei ilan, does that automatically mean it's the other category of a stei lavan?
That's what I'm saying. But let me
add
add
something. You have
a
regular garden with vegetables,
very good,
whatever.
Very good. It's all fields can only be planted. I don't know about garden. I know about fields. Maybe we didn't learn enough yet. I don't know about a garden. But if the field is not an orchard, then it will be classified as a grain field. And just to make it clear, right around that tree, you will be allowed to plow until Shavuos. We'll see how close. But a very limited area. All the rest will be called the stei lavan. And as we learned in the previous Masechta, don't forget, Kilei Zeroyim never disallows me, never forbids me planting around trees anything that I want. I can plant vines near trees. I can plant. So people actually, that's what they did. When they would have trees dispersed in their land, they wouldn't leave the rest of the land fallow. They would plant, let's say, grain. So it's classified as a grain field.
They call it a cover crop.
A cover crop. We saw this in B'mitzias over there, in Kevan's, in Gabriel's farm. Now another detail. It's not just 3 trees. So says the Mishnah. You know when the 3 trees count as trees? Im ru'uyim lasois kikar devela shal shisha mana be'italki. Look at how these Italians were zoicha to kricharain in Kedushin and a Mishnah here in Shavuos. So like this. That, first of all, 60 mana is a weight. So 1 mana weighs 100 dinars. 1 dinar weighs 6 ma'ah. Each ma'ah is 16 barley grains. So just to know the shiurim over here. And we're using this Italian coin. One of the reasons is the Rashes is because the Italian coin from the times of Moshe Rabbeinu all the way until when the Mishnayos were recorded did not change size. Okay? So that's why we are using that as a standard weight, and it's about a weight. Now, we're saying whether the trees have figs or not. This is important. Even if they don't have figs, if they would have been a fig tree, that's what we're looking at. How much weight of figs will either all 3 produce together or each tree produce? Now we covered all of the Rishonim. So, imru'uyim lasois kikar devela. Kikar devela is just when they would have figs, they would press them and they would make them into cakes. That's the way they would preserve them. So if you can have either from each of the trees or from all 3 together, Kikar devela that will wait 60 mana. What type of mana? The Italian mana. Ooh, now again, that is what you need. And those 3 trees are in a Beisa, and minimally, you have 4 amas in between them. Then kol Beisa b'shvilan. Then we say it's a stay Elon. It's a stay Elon. However, the Mishnah speaks out, if it's pachos mikan, either way. Either it's not 3 trees, or you have 3 trees, but they don't produce that minimum amount of product. They're taka there. So then that Beisa is not called a stay Elon. We're going to call that area a stay Lavan. Stay Lavan also from Pesach. But hold on, but I have a tree. What are you talking about? I want to plow my tree that taka has a small, and you could, but a very limited. What's the limited? Ein charshin lahen. We're speaking about between Pesach and Shavuos. That's what we're talking about. Ella meloy ha'oire, in the holy tongue, harvesting, right, is in English, lahavdil, harvesting, whatever. In the Torah, it's not that way. You're harvesting grain, it's called ktsira. Harvesting grapes, it's called bitzira, right? Harvesting figs is called oire. That's the oire. That's Danny's daughter, but that's oire is harvesting figs. So when people would want to harvest a fig tree, holding a basket, how much space do they need? I'm telling you, it's 2 amas. But the shear that the Chazal gave was ein chorshin lahen ela meloy ha'oira v'saloi, for the harvester of the figs and his basket, for him to have enough space, not only to harvest from under the branches, that avada, but even going out of it, which is 2 amas, that you can plow all the way up until Shavuos. But everything else, it's no longer a stay Elon, and you're bound to the halacha that we didn't learn yet. And we already learned that the whole thing collapsed by Rabbi Gamliel. We're learning about the error between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel and Rabbi Gamliel, that the Isur begins earlier, which is from Pesach. We're clear. It's good, simple. Now,
so the key is that if you have a lot of fruit on your trees, then you get more time to harvest or to plow
I would
around
guess,
them
I'm
or
guessing
whatever.
now, I think when people have proper trees, even though they might end up planting other stuff in the area in between the trees, there's no issue with kalaim at all. But a person views that land as my fig tree land, or it can be apples. Like I said, no matter what the tree is, you have to know, you have to be a botanist. If that tree would have been fig, how much would it produce? That's what you have to do. And somehow they know how to do that. So how do I view this land? And if I don't have that much product, or even if my trees, let's say it means every tree, but I only have 2 trees, as an owner, you don't view that as an orchard. You say, wow, I have 2 great trees, but I got to use the land for something. Gewaldig. Okay, now we're making an equation, and we're jumping to a Mishnah in Bava Basra. And like I mentioned, when a person makes a sale, obviously, if a person sells trees and they specify with the land, without the land, we're not talking about how much land, just a concept. And when I sell you a tree, if I only sold you a tree, you do not own the land for a million things. Like, what happens if the tree dries out? Can you plant another tree in its place? Well, if you bought the tree and the land, then you could. If you only bought the tree, then you don't have any rights in the land other than leaving the tree as it is right now, but you can't make any other shunoim and many, many other nafkaminas. You can't say, well, if I only would have sold you the tree, you only would have paid $100. I charge you $1,000. That's a proof you bought the land. When it comes to real estate, it means nothing. As we know from LA, I can charge you any number I want for the smallest amount of land. And LA is expressing what's really happening in the Holy Land. Everything begins over there. There's no value. It's infinitely valuable. So from the number of money, you don't have any clarity. If Dina de Malchusa, if the way of the land is, again, if you have to know the locality, that when I say trees, it means land, it's also going to be helpful. But if you live in a place where it's not clear, it's vague. So we don't know, when I sold you trees, was it with the land or without the land? Now here in Bava Basra, we're not speaking about an orchard. We're speaking just about the land under the tree. And immediately around it, same immediately around it. So we have a similarity of 3 trees. There is such a thing of 3 trees in a certain location. We want to see how similar is that halacha to what we're learning over here. So let's begin with what we learned over there. Rabbi Yehuda b'shem Shmuel and Rabbi Bo b'shem Rabbi Yechanan. So the halacha is both Shmuel and Rabbi Yechanan. That when we learned in the Mishnah, when a person purchased 3 trees in someone else's field, and we have this Mishnah that gives us 3 trees acquires land, very unclear. How do they have to be spaced? Here we have not spacing, but at least in our Mishnah we have how much product does it produce. So here the Amoraim added a detail, and even though what we're saying now is both in the name of Shmuel and the name of Rabbi Yechanan, not to get confused with the machlokes Rav and Shmuel we'll have in a moment, we're going to quote this Rabbi Yechanan. So Rabbi Yechanan said like this, he added to the Mishnah, not 3 trees sold in a Beisah, then you automatically got the land under the tree. Never the whole Beisah, the land under the tree. He added, he says, that's only if they are the choikim mata esed lebeisa and keroivim kadesha yehei habakad oila bekelov. Okay. That when do we say in the Mishnah, which the Mishnah says, that you acquired the land under it, and again the 2 amas around it. You know when that is? It's not just if there are 3 trees in a beisah, which is what the Mishnah says. He added, they have to be spaced. There's a maximum and a minimum. They can be beyond something. If they're beyond something, you don't get the land. We don't combine them together. And if they are too close, it doesn't combine the land. So what's the maximum? What's the minimum? So the words that Rabbi Yechanan and Shmuel said was rechoikim mata esed lebeisa. Very helpful if you have the picture. So if you take a beisah, guys, don't forget. Let's go with you have 10 trees. Let's go with 20. I'll tell you by heart. 2,500 square amas. If you have 10 trees in a beisah, and here they are equally spaced. First of all, how many square amas? If 10 is 2,500, so 1 is 250. If you have to know how to make the math. If you were to take 10 trees and spread them out equidistant in an area of a beisah, each one occupying 250 square feet, let's box them, not circle them. And you were now to measure what is the oirech and the roichav of every box, placing the tree in the center. You'll see that it's 15 amas, 0.81. And and now you're going to go ahead and you're going to spread out these 10 trees. 10 trees in a beisah, not 3 trees. Equidistance, how much space will you have in between each tree? 15 amas, 0.81.
Not square.
We don't need it to be a square. We want the 10 to be equidistant, and we're boxing off the beisah. And he made a cheshbon where the 2 rows, that's not again 2 rows, 1 row. He wants to show you that no matter in what direction you go, if you spread them out equidistant, just like if every box is 15.81 by 15.81, if the trees are planted in the middle. So the bottom line is, says Rabbi Yechanan, that we do not want for the trees to be farther than 15.81. Because if the 3 trees that you bought, the Mishnah says you buy 3 trees, you bought the land under it and around it. Says Rabbi Yechanan, that's only if they're not too far apart. That's what he's saying. If they're too far apart, if I bought from you 3 trees and one is in LA and one is in the Holy Land, Lahavdol, I don't get the land underneath it. So that's the maximum. We only allow them to be distant 15.81. And what about close? We already learned about the close. There has to be at least 4 amas in between them. If you don't have 4 amas in between them, no one would leave them in the ground, because since you cannot plow in between it, it bothers whoever owns it. It was never meant to stay in the land. It was just a tree. It should grow for you to uproot it and plant it somewhere elsewhere. That's the keroivim kedei sheyeh habakar oila bekelov. So in other words, the Mishnah says if I buy 3 trees, I buy the land underneath it and the area around it. Says Rabbi Yechanan, hold on, that they're not too far apart and not too close together. Then, if you meet this criteria, then yes, kana karka shetachteim. That's the law of the Mishnah. And not only the land under it, but karka shabinayim. Actually, you buy all the land in between it. That's a lot. You get all the land in between. No, it's the exposed land between the branches of one tree and the neighbor you get. And what? But that if you have 3 trees, so I get all the land in between. I get all the land. What about on the other side? That maloi ha'oide v'saloi. So actually, you buy a chunk of land. You get a lot of land. Now,
Rabbi.
Yes.
Sorry, quick question. So by this definition, the original premise of 3 trees and a base saw doesn't really make an orchard because the spacing is going to be too great.
Thank you, Vlad. That's exactly what we're getting to. Ishkoyach. But we're not done yet. We're going to come back to that tomorrow. So in other words, let's go. Very good, Vlad. The way we are learning our Mishnah, we're going to get very clear. In our Mishnah, we're going to learn that the minimum share is negay on our Mishnah. It means when our Mishnah says if you have 3 trees that give that 60 mana of Italian whatever, right? If it's in a Beisah, the whole Beisah is called a stay Elon. That's if there's at least 4 amma space in between. The other direction, that it can't be spaced more than 15.81, we're going to go with the many Rishonim. That's not negay here. Before we get to why, that's not negay. I thought we'll get further. I just want to give you a heads up. Aside of Rabbi Yechanan's defining the Mishnah of Bava Basra, there was another question regarding the configuration. The configuration. Line, triangular. Machlokes Rav and Shmuel. And the Gemara is going to begin going mamash Vlad in this direction. In other words, we're going to want to know whether all of these limitations, the Mishnah there says 3 trees, you got the land. Mishnah here says, 3 trees, the whole thing is to stay Elon. Over there's a lot of discussion that limits the Mishnah. Can't be so far, it can't be so close, it can't be a line, it can't be a triangular, it has to be like this, it has to be like that. Do those limitations apply here or not is where we're